Overwatch is a game with a lot of great maps. From the iconically themed Route 66 to the love it or hate it Blizzard World, the beautiful ruins of Ilios to the nail-biting tension of Hanamura, there truly is a level that fits every preference, playstyle, and aesthetic. But today we're going to look at the level design of one specific subset of maps in Overwatch that for my money has the deepest number of high-quality levels among the game's different modes. This is the level design of Overwatch's hybrid maps. If you're unfamiliar with Overwatch, it's important to know that there's actually 4 different subsets of maps within the main game, each providing distinct modes of play that require differing design features. There's control maps, which are actually a series of 3 sub-maps that take place within a single region. In these maps, each team battles for control of a central capture point, similar to a team-based King of the Hill. There's Escort, which has one team on offense escorting a payload across the map to an end destination. There's Assault, in which the offensive team must capture 2 objective points in a specific order. And finally, there's Hybrid, a combination of Assault and Escort. On these maps, the offensive team must first capture a single objective point, which then unlocks the payload that the team safeguards through the rest of the map. Control maps are a lot of fun, but are definitely the most distinct deviation from the other map styles, so let's take a look at the other 3 in a little more detail. In Assault maps, the matches are won and lost on 2 predetermined points, meaning that the vast majority of fights take place on and around these areas. Escort maps are the opposite. While there typically are points on those maps that defensive teams will choose to hunker down in, depending on the situation, they may need to initiate a fight at literally any point along the payload's path. Hybrid maps, meanwhile, are designed to be an exact combination of their Assault and Escort counterparts, and typically manage to take the standout features of each of those modes to create some of the best feeling matches in the game. The main criticism of Assault maps typically revolves around the second objective point, which is always located nearly on top of the defensive team's spawning location. These maps oftentimes create 2 types of scenarios. 1, the offensive team captures the first objective point in a team fight, then snowballs that momentum directly to the second point with several characters' ultimate abilities already built up, effectively steamrolling the defensive team on the second objective and easily winning the round. Or 2, due to the defensive team's extremely close proximity to the second objective point, they're able to constantly reinforce team fights even if the offensive team appears to be winning. This creates a total stalemate on the objective, or leads to long overtime periods of players constantly filling one by one back onto the point. Neither one of these scenarios feels particularly good to play through, and Blizzard has yet to find a true solution to this problem. So here enters the hybrid map, which essentially eliminates these problems by simply swapping out the second objective point with the payload found in Escort maps. So at this point, I think a fair question for some people to ask is, why keep the first objective point at all? Why not just turn hybrid maps straight into full Escort maps? And there's a few reasons for this. It creates some interesting situations unique to this style of map. By keeping the first objective point, these maps still create the tension of teams setting up for large-scale fights fixated on one central feature, something that does feel good in Overwatch when it clicks correctly. Sometimes it's okay to force teams to gather around one central point on the map. A lot of full games are built around this concept, and doing so allows the developers to be very deliberate about the design of that specific square footage of the level, because they know it's going to be a high-traffic area that sees a lot of action.
Fascinating.
But because the objective points in hybrid maps are built to be less fortress-like than their Assault map counterparts, and due to the natural spawn advantage of the team on offense, in most games the objective will eventually be captured, and the payload section of the map will begin. Because of the time bank system that Overwatch implements, a defensive squad that can hold this point longer will be at a greater advantage for the rest of the map. This creates a situation where the objective point is still important, but by no means decides how the rest of the match plays out. And if the offense has built up momentum from the first capture point, there isn't one last specific point they can save their ultimate abilities for, like in Assault maps. They have a whole second and third section to the map that they need to win as well. The other reason hybrid maps are an essential piece of Overwatch is because, like many other multiplayer shooters, this is a game that thrives on consistent gameplay systems within a variety of environments. In other words, the type of gameplay that takes place throughout each match is largely the same, and in this case it's really solidly built. But the element that keeps this game fresh is the variety of situations you'll come across within that gameplay, and the differing styles of maps is a big part of that. The 4 different types of maps create scenarios in which different strategies are needed to be successful, different team compositions work better than others, and different types of play can be more impactful. So with that out of the way, let's dive into how these hybrid maps are designed. As of the making of this video, Overwatch contains 5 hybrid maps: Blizzard World, Eichenwalde, Hollywood, King's Row, and Numbani. And I'll be using examples from each one of these levels to highlight the functions and features of this style of map. So despite an impressive amount of visual variety within the level design, all map styles in Overwatch follow a template, and hybrid maps are no different. Each hybrid level contains 3 main areas: an initial capture point located shortly after the offensive team's spawning location, an outdoor middle section that takes the payload along a long path of winding corridors, and finally a more condensed ending area leading to the payload's final destination. While each of the hybrid maps are visually distinct and offer their own deviations on design, every single one follows this same 3-part formula.
A pattern forms.
And it works really well. Here we see some shots of the first area of these maps. These typically have a main path to follow, but often will also split off into at least one other narrow side path that leads to the objective. Along the main path and just before the objective area, there will be a tight choke point that the team is filtered into in order to reach their first destination. The initial choke points in hybrid maps are typically different than the tougher choke points found in assault maps, which often have higher walls that provide less openings to go over. In contrast, hybrid maps contain more manageable choke points, with opportunities to go through, around, or over in order to progress to the objective. Here's a comparison between the initial choke points in the hybrid map Eichenwalde and the assault map Volskaya Industries. The objective that must first be captured in hybrid maps is also built differently, as they're typically simply a designated space on the ground that happens to be within an area along the main path, compared to the first objective points in assault maps, which are usually structurally dictated. In other words, the capture points in assault maps are more physically surrounded by buildings and high ground for the defensive team to utilize. On these maps, the objectives are supposed to be difficult to capture.
So like a spherical cow.
And it's not uncommon to find yourself in matches in which the defensive team is able to hold this first point for the entire round. In contrast, the offensive team's capture of these points on hybrid maps is usually not a matter of if, but when, and you can see this reinforced pretty clearly in the design of the layout of the spaces. To more clearly demonstrate this, here's the first objective in the assault map Hanamura, and here's the objective in the hybrid map Hollywood. Assault objectives feel like areas that were intentionally designed to be self-contained battlegrounds, while hybrid objectives feel like an organic extension of the natural path to the level. The second main piece of all hybrid maps is a long, winding middle section that is usually more open, both on the X and Y axis, providing long sight lines and plenty of space for characters with aerial abilities to move around without too many structural limitations. The payload must be escorted along these corridors that frequently turn at sharp angles, providing various subsections for the defensive team to set up and prepare for fights. This middle section is always the longest area of the level, at least in terms of physical distance. Lastly, hybrid maps conclude with a more densely packed close quarters section, leading to the payload's final destination near the defensive team's spawning point. These ending sections are a stark contrast to the middle areas, and the design features here typically change pretty quickly. Check out the difference in both design and mood when you hit this point in Eichenwalde. These final areas are almost always located indoors, automatically creating tighter encounters and less space for mobile characters to move around in. But they are also a lot shorter than the middle sections of the maps, which means the whole distance can be covered in 1 or 2 solid pushes by the offensive team. These design choices, coupled with the fact that the end of the payload's path is located so close to the defensive team's spawn, create situations of constant tension to finish the level off. But because hybrid and escort maps are determined by the distance you push the payload, and not necessarily whether or not you reach a certain point, it rarely feels like an all or nothing moment. King's Row is a map that many consider to be the gold standard in Overwatch. It's a map that very clearly defines the overall level design philosophy that Blizzard took with most of the game, and has very quickly entered itself into the ring of all-time great FPS levels. King's Row is well known for having some of the most solid, balanced, and entertaining design in the entire game. It combines all of the elements mentioned so far, and they're coupled with an interesting and immersive backdrop that helps bring the level to life. It also, of course, happens to be a hybrid style map. So let's take a quick walkthrough of it and examine how it implements each of the design elements highlighted in this video. Alright, I'm throwing the script out. Time to enter casual narration mode. Okay, welcome to King's Row. We know this is King's Row because we have the iconic double-decker bus here. And as we enter King's Row, we come out of the offensive spawning point right here. And the first thing you notice is that the distance from the spawn to the initial choke point right here is not very far, right? Especially compared to other hybrid maps like Numbani or Hollywood. There's really not a lot of distance to cover from start to finish. And then when we get to this choke point here, this is kind of exactly what I'm talking about when I say it's a manageable choke point. So you can see it's kind of a wide opening here that opens into the objective area right there. And then the wall that's preventing us from moving forward it's really just kind of a fence, right? So if you have a character with any sort of aerial ability, like the one that I have right now, you can pretty easily get over that. There's a wide space that allows you to move right over that wall. And then the actual opening itself, we have a nice big opening. In an assault map, this would look pretty different. These walls here would probably go all the way up to prevent you from going over them. There may be a small window somewhere around here that you could go through. And then the actual opening of the choke point itself would also look different. It would either be narrower or it would be enclosed more. So you don't have all of this room to work with like you do in this choke point right here. And then in addition to that, we also have this pathway over here where you can go through the building. And there's an additional exit through this balcony that takes you out to the other side of that choke point. So a couple different opportunities to go over, to go around, and to go through the initial choke point. Then as we make our way to the actual objective point, which you see here outlined in red, you can see what I'm talking about as far as the layout and design of the objective. It's just kind of an open area in the middle of the natural pathway of the map. It's not super enclosed. It's not inside of a building like you'd see in a lot of assault maps. There's still plenty of high ground. There's still plenty of points for the defensive team to set up to wait for the offense to come through and try to capture the objective. But it's not a defensive stronghold, right? So the combination of this choke point right here and this open objective point makes a very manageable situation for the offense, in that usually the offensive team at some point will end up capturing this point and unlocking the payload. Okay, so after we unlock the payload, we enter the second zone of the map, which starts right here after this large archway. And this has us traveling through the streets of King's Row. And you can see we're taking the payload through this long, winding corridor. And this area has these kind of sharp turns, these sharp angles that create different subsections of the map. And it allows the defense to kind of set up in these different areas as the offense comes around the corner. King's Row is a little bit unique compared to other hybrid maps in the sense that this middle area is actually a little more enclosed than the other ones. So in other hybrid maps like Blizzard World, Eichenwalde does this as well. They have very open areas. King's Row is a little bit more enclosed because of the buildings that surround this middle area, but it follows the same template with this long corridor that snakes through. And it's a large physical distance from one end to the other. These middle areas of the map always have a lot of side corridors, opportunities for flanking from different directions. They have long sight lines. And then we'll see this change as soon as we enter the third section of the map here. Okay, so as we enter the final zone of King's Row, you're going to notice the change in structural design and just aesthetics and mood as we move from this large outdoor open area into the final section. As soon as we enter here, things immediately close off. Right, we enter this indoor area, things are a lot closer, it creates this opportunity for close encounters, battles between the teams. And the pathway that the payload takes, it's similar in layout as the middle section, but it's a lot shorter distance. There's not a whole lot of ground to cover from that point where we open the door until our final destination right over here. So I'm up here on one of the points of high ground on the last section of the map to demonstrate one of the trademark components of any hybrid or escort map in the final section, which is the height, right? So I have a character here who has probably the highest amount of verticality of any character in the game, and you can see that I'm kind of limited up here. I can't move up as high or as far as I want to. And that's by design, right? Everything here is closed in. Characters with high movement or movement abilities cannot use them probably as effectively as they're used to. That doesn't mean that they can't still be used. It just creates a different play style that the player has to be aware of if they're choosing one of those characters. So in the final section of the map here, this is our endpoint. The defensive spawns come from there and there, and you can see that there's a pretty short distance between the spawning point and the final point for the payload. But because this is a payload map and not a control point map, there's not this constant battle for one singular section. There's not a constant filling in necessarily, because you're only trying to get the payload as far as you can rather than trying to get it onto one single area of the map. Okay, so that's King's Row. This is probably one of the more well-liked maps in the game, and it's just one of the really good examples of level design in Overwatch, because every area within this map is so distinct, and it so clearly represents the different styles of play that's required for each section. It's just a great example of a really good map that's featured in a game that really contains a lot of great maps. Okay, so would Overwatch be as fun if every map was designed just like King's Row? Of course not. Then we'd just end up with essentially the same level using 20 different cosmetic palettes. And fortunately, the designers at Blizzard are fantastic at utilizing small changes between levels while sticking to the standard layouts that work so well. Simple things like the elevation difference in Eichenwalde creating an uphill path for the attacking team. The canals in Rialto dictating the map's pathway rather than the constricting buildings of most other maps. And of course, the low-gravity outdoor area in Horizon Lunar Colony. None of these features drastically change the levels to the point where they deviate too far from the formula that's consistently present throughout the game, but they each provide a unique flavor to help distinguish themselves from other areas. These small deviations, coupled with Blizzard's fantastic art design and theming of each map, mean that every match can feel both fresh and familiar at the same time. Whether you're fighting through the futuristic streets of Numbani or the theme park-inspired biomes of Blizzard World, the hybrid mode in Overwatch provides a deep pool of maps that consistently offer fun, balanced, and engaging matches that players keep coming back to. When Overwatch 2 is released, at some point, I'll be excited to see what Blizzard can do with this formula inside a new framework. But for now, there's still plenty of points to capture, plenty of payloads to move, and plenty of excellent level design to enjoy. Could you imagine if Santa just rolled through the streets on his sleigh like this?